revolves around language and identity in a world of multiple crises. And it hopes to be a space to provoke critical and creative debate among all the participants. So we welcome you all to actively participate in the debate because your engagement is vital for to enrich the discussion. Without further ado, I would like to invite the coordinator of the ECDDay's organizer committee, Drs. Mariana Peixoto and Larissa Mazzucchelli, the coordinator of the graduate program in linguistic studies, Dr. Cristiane Brito, and the coordinator of the English and literature course offered in distance learning format, Dr. Ivan Ribeiro, to please take their seats and welcome you shortly.
So good morning, everyone. My name is Mariana Peixoto, and I'm really glad to be here today. On behalf of the organizing committee of the 10th ECD Day, I would like to welcome everyone who is present and those watching us on YouTube. This is an event that has been crafted by countless hands and minds. So first and foremost, I would like to thank Larissa Mazzucchelli, who readily accepted to co-coordinate the organization of this edition with me, and to all the members of our crew, namely Amanda Massuretti, Carolina Goulart, Cristiane Brito, Edberto Rocha, Iana Biatti, Ivan Ribeiro, João Pedro Pereira, Lara Souza, Maria Fernanda Capel, Nayara Rocha, Rebeca Cruz, Stella Menezes, and Vitória Castão. Also, the organization of this edition wouldn't have been possible without the support of some partners. They are PPGEL, LID, PET Letras, Valesca, thank you very much for your support, ProInt, Central de Línguas, ILEEL, and ProEx. This year, we celebrate a milestone of 10 editions of ECDDay. And we believe it's really important to acknowledge that its very existence wouldn't have been possible if our dear Carla Tavares, who is right over there, hadn't proposed it in the first place. So we would like to thank her and dedicate this edition to her as well. Carla, you rock. To our guests, Lin Maio, Jana Viscardi, Juliana Santana, Ernesto Bertoldo, Maria Luisa Nobre, and Rogério Ângelo, thank you for accepting our invitation. It's an honor and a great joy for us to have you here today. Without further delay, I wish everyone an excellent event. I hope today will be a day of exchanges and affection. And please feel free to speak your Englishes because they are the only ones that we have. Remember that the purpose of ECDDay is also to be a safe space without judgment. So we hope you all enjoy it. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. It is such a pleasure to be here today, the 10th edition of ECDDay. I'm a little bit nervous because I'm just in front of Professor William, and you know what I mean. But okay, been a while since I last spoke English, but I guess I'll do it. Well, on behalf of the Programa de Pós-Graduação em Estudos Linguísticos, or just PPGEL, I'd like to thank and congratulate Professors Larissa Mazzucchelli and Professor Mariana Peixoto for leading the organization of this edition of ECDDay. And of course, also thank Carla for always being here in the very first edition and believing in this project. We know that events like ECDDay are a very important initiative when we think of the process of what has been called internationalization at home. And one of the possibilities and challenges we have when we think of internationalization at home is the challenge to speak, to enunciate in a foreign language, in a language that we may not feel totally comfortable with, or we may totally feel in love with, and having to enunciate about things that are really important for us, our research projects, our concerns about teaching and learning languages. So we know this is a challenge we face from the point of view of a graduate program and also undergraduate programs. But here we are, so trying to speak this language the way we can do it, from where we are, from who we are. And we know that for those who have been following ECDDay since its beginning, since its first editions, we know that it's much more than an event to practice English conversation. ECDDay is an event that allows us to reflect about the complexity of language use, of, in fact, of what languages are, if they are something. And I'm pretty sure Professor Limaru will provoke us on this morning. So I just want to thank you very much for being here. I hope we have a very fruitful dialogue this day with rich conversations and with lots of sharings for all of us. Thank you very much.
Now you need to do my English. Greetings, gentlefolk. Good morning to you all. It's a pleasure to be here. I would like to greet this table on behalf of Professors Mariana and Larissa, and also say that I'm really proud to be a part of this 10th edition of ECDDay. I would like to congratulate the organizing committee, also in the name of Professors Mariana and Larissa, and also greet the presence of Professor Nina Menezes and also Jean Marisa, whom I haven't seen yet, and met yet, but I'm sure that she's going to really great talk to us. I'm really proud to see that ECDDay is facing one more successful mission, its 10th edition, with the theme language and identity in a world of multiple crises. In this very short talk, I would like to point out that these crises also reverberate in our everyday lives, politically, socially, and also psychologically. This theme also comes up in a very auspicious moment with the arrest of the masterminds of the horrendous crime committed against the life of Marielle Franco and Anderson Gomez. So yesterday is a really important moment in our political and social history. And also to mention that the condemnation of those who committed sexual crimes against women under their sexuality labels. May all these justice acts propagate a wave of consciousness about what is right and what is not right. And may we live in a world with respect to all the identities and all the cultures, and in a world that cultivates the language of cooperation and the language of love. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to us, those who are at home or somewhere else, and let us have a really great event. Thank you so much.
Thank you, professors. Now we transition to the opening conference of the event, titled Rereading Language and Identity in Time of Crisis, to be delivered by Dr. Limar Menezes de Souza and moderated by Dr. Flavia Benfatti. We invite you to join us here on stage.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure and an honor. Can you hear me? It's a pleasure and an honor to be here for this 10th ECD Day with Professor Limai, mainly because he supervised me in my PhD research at USP. Limai has a vast academic production, so I'll summarize his resume. Limai is a senior professor in the Department of Modern Languages at the University of São Paulo. He holds a degree in linguistic and literary studies in English at USP, and his research focuses in transdisciplinary, covering teaching, learning of languages, literacies, interculturality, and decolonial theories. He publishes widely in his research areas and collaborates with projects in Brazil and abroad. His talk is entitled Rereading Language and Identity in Times of Crisis. Link, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can I speak from there because I need to see the. Good morning, everybody. First, thank you for the invitation to be here, Mariana, Christian, William, Flavia. And congratulations on this, the organization of this event. I think it's very important for students of English always to reflect on the key word in the title, not English, not language, diversity. Because without diversity, we don't have language and we don't have culture. And I noticed the apologetic tone with some of those who spoke at the beginning, worried about their English. Who cares? The important thing is to communicate, to make yourself understood. And I'd like to begin with that. Where do I find this out? Okay. So I'm talking about rereading language and identity in times of crisis. And as I hope to show you, behind our concepts of language, identity, and our culture, there is always a politics. Right? And it is this politics that makes us need to be apologetic for our accent, for our variety of English. Why? Why do we feel oppressed? If we're not speaking, we think we're not speaking in the correct way because someone has made us feel uncomfortable. And this is the politics of language. Right? So language doesn't exist independent of history or politics. Same with culture, the same with identity. So crisis is always present in language and culture. So let me begin where I'm speaking from. Right? I may not look like it, but I'm British, but I also have 3 other nationalities. Right? But I'm not Brazilian. And this is what I'd like to start with, problematize the concept of being British. In Portuguese, especially here in Brazil, people prefer commonly to use the term inglês, right? And they get confused when I say não sou inglês, eu sou britânico. They don't really know what I mean. To be British is not the same as to be English. To be British, you can be Irish, you can be Scottish, you can be Welsh, or you can be like me, which is to be neither of Irish, Scottish, or Welsh, but I'm British. Why? Because I was born in an area which was colonized by Britain at the time. Yemen, specifically Yemen, you may have heard of it. where a group called the Houthis are the only group in the world who are defending the Palestinian cause for the Palestinians. And they're being called terrorists. So when we defend the cause of a marginalized small group that has been denied its rights, we become terrorists. And there you see the politics behind it, and that makes it clear where I'm speaking. So I'm not just British, I have other identities as well. So identity is always a very complex thing. We don't have singular, homogeneous identity. So in the areas which were colonized by the British until the 1960s, there were these two terms, British subject or British citizen. So everybody was a British subject. I was born a British subject. Now, what does it mean to be a British subject? Literally, the word subject means to be subjected to the authority of the British. Whereas to be a citizen is to have rights. So we were subjected to the British authorities, but we couldn't vote. We didn't have political rights. So to be a citizen, you have to live in the United Kingdom. So there you already see an inequality in the concept of being British, which connects with racism, with imperialism, with colonialism. So people are not equally British. So I became a British citizen only when I lived in England since the age of 10 or 11. So I had rights. I became a citizen. Most of the people who were colonized by the British were not citizens. They never became a citizen. They may use a British passport, but they cannot live in the United Kingdom. So to be British is not equal. Then we have the concept, when we are speaking of English, the native speaker versus the native that speaks. The native here, I'm using it ironically, the native was the subject. The colonized subject was always the native in the eyes of the colonizer, the British colonizer. Right? They always describe themselves as being the British and the native of the people, the local people. Right? And then they call themselves the native speaker. They want to be native speakers, but they don't want to be natives. See all the complexity behind the concept of a native speaker. So those of us for whom English is a native language, we question the concept of a native speaker. Right? And I'm suggesting that you should too. Because it's absurd, and again, it's politically absurd, ethically absurd, to rank people who speak a language in terms of having more rights or less rights. Okay? So yes, I'm a native speaker of English, but when I'm in England, where my family lives, very often I hear this comment, "Oh, your English is so good." What are they telling? They're not complimenting. What are they telling me? Your English is so good. You shouldn't be speaking such good English. Or your English is not your language. You don't. English is my language. I have the right to compliment you on your English. So it's always, it's like the same question I get in England. Oh, hello. Where are you from? Where am I from? This is my country. This is my nation. But they're not asking you, where are you from? What is the meaning of this question? You're not from here. You can't possibly be from here. And generally, because I'm there on work with various British universities. And so when they say, when I hear this question on a university campus in a staff room, hello, where are you from? I say, I'm from linguistics. Where are you from? And immediately they realize the ideology behind the question. So unfortunately, some of us, in my position, we have constantly keep provoking this dominant vision of language, culture, identity being homogeneous. And if you are not, you don't correspond to their concept of homogeneity, you're not worth much. Now, I'm speaking from the position of what are known as British Asians. So these are British citizens who have origins, not necessarily because they were born, because their grandparents or their great-grandparents may have been born there, but they will still have this hyphenated identity of being called British Asian. So the people who look like me, who have their origins in Asia, many countries in Asia. In my case, it's Yemen, it may be India, it may be Sri Lanka, it may be Pakistan, it may be Bangladesh. Nations which were colonized by the British. Now, we are called British Asians in the United Kingdom. Right? They call us this. We don't call ourselves British Asians. We are British. And we form 10% of the population. So we are not an insignificant minority. We are 10% of the population. But unfortunately, in stereotypes of Britain, of English, you don't see us. Now, when I did linguistics I graduated in linguistics in the 60s, and my only possibility of a job was to be a teacher of English, which I didn't want to be. I ended up being, but that's destiny. I had various job interviews in London, schools of English, which taught English to foreigners in London. And what did I hear all the time? You don't look like an English teacher. Because those foreigners who come to learn English in England, they don't expect to have a teacher who looks like them. So this is the hidden history of what we call coloniality and racism, which is hidden behind the British language, everything related to Britain, etc. Okay, so when it comes to in terms of language, we have also an imposed monolingualism, which means what? Growing up in England in the 1960s, obviously I came from a multilingual family, so we spoke other languages, including Portuguese, which is my father's language. People always told us, speak English, speak English. So don't speak these other languages. So monolingualism is part of the colonialism of British culture, British history. Right? It led to the eradication of many languages, like the languages which existed in Scotland. The Welsh language is under serious threat. The Irish language, when they colonized the island, was also marginalized. So together with British history, we have a history of monolingualism, right? And it comes out to you. The same thing as you're worried about how good is your English, if you have an accent or not. I'll say more about this later. English is not spoken with the same accent throughout Britain, not even England. Okay, we have the Scottish accent, we have the Welsh accent, we have the Irish accent. These are not just accents. I'd call it Scottish English, Welsh English, Irish English. But even in England, every 100 kilometers you go in that small country, England is a little bit smaller than the Stade de São Paulo. Right? That's how small it is. So every 100 kilometers you go, the accent changes. So what is English? The accent, like the social history of most languages, what comes to be the standard accent of the standard language is the language of the dominant. The dominant group, the dominant class, the hegemonic group. So everybody speaks English with an accent. It's impossible not to have an accent in any language. We all have accents in whatever language we speak. I will show you in a minute. Accent is part of our identity. I'd just like to. I'm speaking from the point of view of anti-colonial critique, right? In the same way as the Scottish are constantly trying to challenge the hegemony of the English within the United Kingdom. The Welsh do the same, the Irish do the same. So I grew up with this constant need to challenge this monologism of British ideology, treating people who are not upper middle class, white, Christian, English from the London area, treating them as inferior or different. So I grew up with a family who were also from upper middle class, so they were not. We had social prestige, so we had the self-esteem not to accept. It's not very easy to reject discrimination. You need symbolic power. You need self-esteem to be able to react. Fortunately, my family came from a social class where we had this self-esteem, and this is what. Let me just tell you a small story here. I grew up seeing this photograph of the Queen. This is going back to the 1960s. That's why she looks young. Queen Elizabeth II, everywhere, in all the classrooms, in all government offices, right, in museums, everywhere you went, there was an official portrait of the Queen. And so my grandmother, who was also a British subject, taught us, her grandchildren, how to be anti-colonial and to constantly demand your rights and your place in the nation. And she said, look at her. She looked so important, so powerful. She would tell us, her grandchildren, every time you see that photograph, which is everywhere, look at her. She looks so important, so powerful. She looks like God's gift to humanity. But remember, when you look at that photograph, why don't they show you the waist down? So whenever you look at that photograph, think of her sitting on a toilet, like you or me, right? And so we grew up as children. Every time we saw that photograph, we used to smile or laugh, right? Because we knew where she was sitting, other people didn't. And my grandmother did that exactly to deconstruct this aura of authority, of monarchism, which was very colonial. Okay, now I mentioned the fact that behind any concept of language, culture, identity, there is a politics. So before I go on, I'd like to make clear what are the theories that I'm using here to speak. First, I'm using anti-post-colonial theories. There's a list of names there. I'm not going to go into that. So these are theories which constantly challenge colonization as an imposition of certain values, races, knowledges, as being superior to others. I'm using another group of theories called Southern knowledges, and these theories will say that knowledge is always situated. Knowledge doesn't drop out from the skies. Right? Knowledge is produced by people, by bodies, by human beings in certain contexts. So that knowledge is always marked. It always has an accent of the people who produce that knowledge. That knowledge is always subjective. No such thing as objective knowledge. Subjective meaning it is marked by what that person, or the group that person belongs to, believes. So no universal knowledge. Knowledges are always situated. Epistemologies of the South says basically the same thing, and they all use this concept of coloniality, not colonization, coloniality, which says that basically colonization may have ended, but the effects of colonization continue. And the effects of a colonization which has already ended, but the effects remain, this is called coloniality. Here, for example, in Brazil, we can say, we've been independent for 200 years, but the effects of coloniality are still present. The racism, right, the social inequality, these are products, leftovers of colonization. Even the language. Now, what are the concepts I'm using? And these are concepts from my own particular work. I've always, the first two concepts I've mentioned in my work for the last maybe 10 years. Bring the body back. This is what I mean when I say, don't look at knowledge as if it is not produced by bodies. Don't look at science as if science is universal. It's everybody's science. Science is produced by scientists occupying particular bodies. Generally, they are white male scientists, right? They are situated in the global north, most probably, right? They have a history in what they produce. They are producing knowledge based on the knowledges that they already have. There's no other way of producing knowledge. Knowledge doesn't come from us. The same as language. We don't invent language. We don't invent identities. We learn them from the groups to which we belong. So we need to bring the body back to resituate language, knowledge, identity. All of these are located in bodies. We need to mark the unmarked. What is the unmarked? That's what we call the standard, the norm. Everybody knows, everybody believes. This is the unmarked, meaning things which don't have an accent, for example. There is nothing, as I said, which doesn't have an accent, nothing which is universal. Everything is marked. Everything comes from a particular context. Right? So together with that, we need to mark the unmarked. Now, the third item is not my term, but I use it in a particular way. Locus of enunciation. Many people confuse it with lugar de fala. Not the same thing. Locus of enunciation comes from the theory of the philosopher, the Russian philosopher Bakhtin of Voloshina, where he says that language is not a system which simply is floating above a community. Language always begins with speakers. Language begins with speakers for speakers. Without speakers or the users of language, language doesn't exist. Right? So the language we speak will always come from us speakers, and here our bodies as speakers from particular contexts in which our bodies are located. And because, this is the importance of using the word body, because we are speaking from a body, our body is not eternal or universal, unfortunately. Right? So our body has a life, it has a biography. It is born, it lives, it learns, it unlearns, and it dies. The same thing happens with culture, with language, with our values. They all change over time, right? And they die and they replace. So the locus of enunciation simply says that we are always speaking, producing knowledge, communicating, interacting from a particular context. So we are subjects of enunciation from a particular context. The language that we know in that particular context, the language that's located in my body, the knowledge that's located in my body, my identity has been constituted. All of these have been constituted by the discourses which circulate in the community to which I belong. So whatever I say is a product of these several discourses, the discourse of class, the discourse of particular knowledges, the discourse of age group, the discourse of gender, the discourse of religion, just to generalize, right? All of these discourses constitute me are where I'm speaking from. Before I gave you a short history where I'm speaking from one. So this is our locus of enunciation. The discourses that constitute us, they will be the basis of what I think, what I say, what I do. This doesn't mean they determine me, right? Because there are multiple discourses, and this has political consequences. Because there are multiple discourses, they come together within me. I'll give you an example. So now I'm speaking to you as a professor, right? But as soon as I go through that door, I'm just Lin Mario. Okay? When I'm with my family, I may be a father, a husband, someone's son, right? All these will imply different discourses, but it's all in the same body. Now, what can I do with these different discourses? I can connect them. They constitute me, so unless I'm conscious of them, I think I'm always speaking in the same way. I'm not. The way I speak in my classroom is not the same way I speak to my children, to my friends, to my wife in the street. Right? So we have to be aware of these different discourses, these different languages, and this is why I'm criticizing the monological concept of language. And this is our locus of enunciation. So we all have different locuses or loci, if you want, of enunciation, right? But they are not radically different. For example, here, if you are all students of the same course, then you share a discourse, and so your different locuses of enunciation will have this discourse in common. Right? If you want to speak as a woman, then the discourse that constitutes you as a woman is shared by other subjects who consider themselves women. So at various times, the multiple discourses that constitute us are shared with others or not shared with others, depending on the situation we are in. So we are never totally different, right? And we are never totally the same. So these discourses predispose us to think in a certain way, to act in a certain way, but they don't determine us. Why don't they determine us? Because the multiple discourses that constitute each of us varies individually. So if we look at people within the same family, right, you think, oh, we're all members of the same family, but you can be different. Siblings, you can be different to each other. Your parents may think differently to you. Right? What happens there is at certain moments we can make connections. We can disconnect from a particular discourse. For example, the discourse of gender. When I'm conscious of the discourse of gender that constitutes me in a patriarchal society, I can critically disconnect from this discourse, refuse to be constituted by this discourse, and learn, for example, from other discourses which are non-patriarchal. So we always have this possibility of acting, this agentivity of disconnecting from the discourses that constitute us and connecting to other discourses. Because to do this, we need to be critically conscious of these discourses that constitute us. And now, the last point there in this slide is, I call this disconnection and reconnection short-circuiting discourses. Right? So short-circuiting is making connections that were not foreseen. Now, I suggest, let's say, a decolonial, anti-colonial, post-colonial. I'm not going to make distinctions at the moment. There are distinctions, but to question coloniality, to question the effect, the continuing effect of colonization. This is a pedagogy which I suggest. There's three phases: identify, interrogate, and interrupt. So identify how colonization affects you. So when you begin to see, oh, this thing about native speaker English, I'm obliged to speak in English in a particular way. This is coloniality. Right? So identify, interrogate it. Interrogate meaning, why should I speak like this? Where does this come from? What does it do to me? It is oppressing me. It is obliging me to be what I'm not. Right? Interrogate it, and then interrupt it. Okay, interrupt the effects. We cannot totally eliminate coloniality. It's not within our power. It's something so pervasive. It will take much more than an individual effort. But we can interrupt the effects at the local level. Okay? So just summarizing what I've said here, everything we speak, we do, we say, we think, all the knowledge we produce is never universal. It's always situated, it's always local. Anything which claims to be universal is the local of the powerful. When the local knowledge of the powerful is disseminated, the local language of the powerful is disseminated to those who are being dominated, it acquires the appearance of being universal. Okay, so just summarizing here what I've already said. So language, Bakhtin uses this term dialogic. Language is dialogic, not monologic. Language is not an abstract system of norms. It is not universal. It is not permanent, eternal, it changes. Language occurs in context and in interaction between specific interlocutors. So language is not grammar, it is not an abstract system. Grammar and an abstract system are pedagogical, political tools which help us to learn language or help us to oppress people through language, but they are not language. Language, this is curious, especially when we're dealing with reading and writing. So we think that writing is alphabetic, right? It's very simple to teach writing. Let's teach the alphabet and then we can simply read aloud what is written on the page. No. Language is always redundant. Sounds strange, but no. We think we want to say something new. But we can only understand what we already understand. Get it? I'm not saying anything new, but I may surprise you by how I'm saying it. So what we don't understand, what we find difficult to understand, we don't understand. What we find easy to understand, it's because we already know. And so what I always tell my students, especially at my postgraduate or graduate students, don't complain to me if you find a text difficult. That text is difficult because the knowledge is new to you. Right? If you're here to learn and you read a text which you consider to be easy, you're not learning anything. So everything we don't know already presents a difficulty for us. So those of us who are in a university, in a learning situation, we should expect what we are learning to present a certain level of difficulty. Okay? So this reminds us that our common views of language are redundant. We can only understand what we already understand. How does it work in terms of culture? When you see people like what's happening in Europe with Muslim women, they're wearing a veil. I don't know what the veil means, right? But it has no meaning. It's meaningless. Take it off, right? Go away. Take it off. It's what you're doing there is, if I don't understand it, it has no meaning. It's meaningless. It offends me. Right? That's how redundancy works politically. Right? So we don't accept things that we don't know, we don't understand. We are in a politically dominant, hegemonic position. Okay, so I'm not saying that we should, please don't understand me as saying that we should do away with norms. We should do away with language system. No, what I'm saying is we should change it from being universal to being local. Okay? So you may be happy when I criticize grammar, but what I'm saying is we don't have just one grammar, we have several grammars. Each of those discourses that I mentioned, those several discourses that constitute us, you can understand them as a grammar. If we, by grammar, we understand something prescriptive. This is how you should act. This is what you should know. This is what you should say. This is what we learn from the social discourses. How much time do I have left?
10 minutes.
10?
12 minutes.
Okay. Okay, just to give you an example of the importance of context in language, right? So you probably know what this means, right? But if I show this to people who speak Portuguese in Portugal, They probably won't know. You know what it means? The context? Okay, let me give you more context.
Soccer.
This is the opposing version. Expressamente proibido em prato de verde. Okay, some more context. Yes?
Yep.
More context for the other one. More context now. Total context. Here we have two rival football teams. But if we just look at the words, the meaning is not in the words. The meaning is in the context. We're not talking only about language, we're talking about culture and identity. So to support, these are the fan groups, let's call them, of the supporters of these teams, which have created a local culture, a local identity, to the extent that they want to eliminate the other. Right? And this is the politics behind language and identity. And here, I'd just like to focus on this a little bit more. This summarizes what I've been saying so far. So, language and identity in dialogism. Here in the middle, it's not very clear, but it says crisis, incompleteness, ignorance, translation. Right? So, crisis, which is one of the themes of crisis in the plural, one of the themes of this event today. Right? Crisis only appears when we don't have homogeneity. Otherwise, we always have crisis. Every time we come across difference, it's a crisis. Why is it a crisis? Because I have to reformulate all my presuppositions that my knowledge is universal, my language is universal, my identity is universal, and suddenly when I'm confronted by someone who doesn't speak my language, who doesn't have my identity, who doesn't share my knowledge, it puts me into crisis. Now, how do we react in crisis? We can react by simply eliminating the other. We don't give value to the other. Oh, that other becomes invisible. Colonization, racism does this all the time. So the other, which I have created, why do I call this other and other? Because it's different to me. So he or she is an other. But others don't exist. So if you see what is under that, the other of my other is other. Who is the other of my other? Myself. So there is no such thing as I am a self and the other is another. We have two selves or we have two others. We are always other to someone else in the same way as someone else is other to us. Now that is a perception which is the basis for being critical. And when we understand that for someone different to us, we are also different, we are also strange, right? Then it will force us to rethink the connections between the discourses that constitute us. And here, these are two, I'm taking at the bottom, in the middle, two terms from Paulo Freire, right? Where the terms are being in the world and being with the world. Because estar no mundo, estar com o mundo. Right? Estar no mundo is we are always in a particular situation. We are always situated. We are not floating in the universe out of context. We are always situated within a particular context. We are always no mundo, estar no mundo. We are always in the world. Right? Now, when we are in the world, let's say, like here, I'm in the world now speaking to you. Right? At the same time, as Freire reminds us, we are with the world. You are with the world, I am with the world. What does this mean? You bring your world to this moment of contact. I bring my world to this moment of contact. So we're not simply in the world, we bring our worlds to this moment of contact. Right? Contact. So this is where we may be speaking the same language, we may be having the same identity, or maybe not. Right? So it is estar com o mundo, being with the world, that tells us, that gives us the accent that we have. I have the accent, which reminds me of the context that I belong to. So my accent is my identity. It's not something I should eliminate. If you eliminate your accent, you get lost. Which world do I have with me? So here we have the power relations. First, you can see there are two others, the little arrows, and two others in a moment of interaction, the dialogism. They are interacting with each other. And the little balloons behind the arrows are the various discourses that constitute these subjects. Right? So these discourses, we can make different connections, we can short circuit, we can even disconnect from the discourses that constitute us. Like we can change the theories that we have learned and become different subjects. But that previous connection is still part of our history. It doesn't vanish. What else do we have here? The important thing, this sentence over here, the others in me that speak me. This is important to understand from my perspective, is that we are not saying something original. Right? We are being spoken by the discourses that constitute us. The way we learn to think is the way that we think. And Paulo Freire says this: antes de ser o eu de mim mesmo, eu fui o você de outro. What does this mean? It means that when we were little babies, not yet having learnt a language, not yet having anything to say, I mean verbally, where did we learn our language from? From the caretakers, the people around us, right? Our family, our community, they were speaking to us. So we were the vocês, we were the yous, before we were the ours. Right? That is how we have learned our language from those around us, those who were born before us, those who had a history before us. This is what situatedness means. Right? So when we learn to speak, we are speaking their language. As Bakhtin will say, the words that we speak are always the words of others. So the words of others have the meanings that the others deposited in them as well. Right? So you may think you're using the words in a particular way, but those others who taught you those words may understand your words in their own way. This is the complexity of language, the wealth of language. So accent is part of the complexity and the wealth of language. Don't apologize. Understand accent. Work with it. So here at the bottom is where I will end. When I say, and again, this is what I've been writing about in the last 15, 20 years, perhaps. The term that I call in Portuguese, leve silendo. How do we acquire this criticality, this capacity to disconnect from our discourses, not to be victims of the ideologies that have constituted us, not to simply speak as the others who taught me the discourses that I learned, right, but to speak differently. We need to constantly read ourselves reading. We need to constantly listen to ourselves listening. Paulo Freire talks a lot about escuta, importance of escuta. Okay, so we think that listening is listening to others. No, you may be listening to others with your politics in mind. Oh, that poor person, he's inferior, he doesn't know very much, right? He's insignificant, but I'm going to be a good person and I'm going to listen. But I'm not giving any importance to what he said, he or she. That's not listening. Listening is first listening to yourself. Why am I saying what I'm saying? Why am I thinking what I think? Why am I understanding what I understand? Then I will notice it's because of the discourses that constitute me. Because I learned to think like this from this place and that place and that place. I learned to believe in this from this bibliography, that bibliography. Now, all of these discourses that constitute me may make it difficult for me to understand someone who's very different. this is the importance of this book. Don't just listen to other people from a position, an hegemonic position. First, listen to yourself speaking, thinking. Read yourself reading. Right? Constantly read yourself reading, and then you can understand your difficulties, and then you can overcome your difficulties. You can look for what you do out, be able to understand what you consider to be difficult in your reading. So even today, when decoloniality has become such a fashion in our universities, right? I think I'm going to end with this. And I constantly remind my students or whoever I'm talking to, before you want to be decolonial and speak about decoloniality, decolonize yourself. Right? What does that mean? Okay, coming back now, I'm going to end with where I began, locus of enunciation, situatedness. So what does it mean for a Brazilian to think from a decolonial position? Decolonial position means to criticize the colonization that constituted me as a subject. Be aware of the colonization that contributed to my way of thinking and changing this way. Unfortunately, when you look at how people in different Brazilian universities are reading and dealing with decoloniality, they don't begin with the decolonization of themselves. Why not? They don't speak about racism. Where did racism come from in Brazil? It was a product of colonization. So if you want to talk about decoloniality, begin by thinking about why you don't want to confront the problem of racism, which is a very serious problem in this country. People go on reading all the Latin Americans, etc., even Paulo Freire. Paulo Freire himself did not confront this topic of racism enough. He talked about indigenous communities, marginalization, oppression, but he didn't. He was a product of his times, like we all are. So let's do decoloniality, yes, but let's begin by how we have all had a racist reputation in this country, which has taught us that certain members of our population are invisible, they're worthless. Right? This has been learned. Unfortunately, if discourses that constituted us, we can make these disconnections and reconnections. Yeah? So we can be conscious of what we call the structural racism that colonization has given us and made us think, but we have to be conscious. You may say, oh no, but I'm not a racist. Yes, you are. If you're Brazilian, born and bred in Brazil, educated in Brazil, racism is part of Brazilian history. So even if you don't think you're racist, you are, because it's part of what you have learned and considered to be natural. If you're not conscious of this, how can we change racism? It's not enough. Systemically courts, etc., that's not enough. It's not enough for you to attack anyone of color. The important thing is to undo the discourses that are constructed. So, I'll end there. This is how crisis, we have to be aware of the crises that constitute us. And when we are not aware, we have to provoke these crises in ourselves. And there are crises in language, in culture, in education. This is that word which is very difficult to understand, diversity. Okay? Diversity is not by numbers. It means we have, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 different things here. No, these 10 different things are not diverse. They are, amongst these 10 different things, we may have 8 which consider themselves to be superior, and 2 which are considered to be inferior. Diversity is not putting everything on a horizontal level. Diversity implies changing the politics of confidence. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. Now it's time to exchange some ideas. Please feel free to raise your hand and ask some questions. And those who are tuning in on YouTube, feel free to ask to place your comments and ask questions. And Dr. Claudia Vicati will moderate this conversation.
Can I feel free to say something?
Yes.
Thank you, Lynn, for your enlightening and motivating talk. You provoked even more crises in me. I have something to say based on what you said at the beginning of your conversation. It's about the empowered language English is. I remember when I was much younger, when people used to say, you have to be near native in order to speak good English. So that struck me. I mean, it was difficult to think of that because how can we be near native? So it was a pressure on us. It was very oppressive at the time. So, and also your talk makes me think of border thinking and thinking literature in literary terms. So we have the Chicanos in the United States, and we have an author called Diane Burns, and she questions in literature. She questions the fact that she writes in English and in Spanish and some indigenous language because she comes from she's indigenous American. And there's a poem, it's called, so you can ask me a personal question. So people starts asking her, are you Chicana? Are you indigenous? Are you something that you mentioned? So she says in the end that she doesn't have an identity because the people put a pressure on her that she should be American, Native American. I mean, she's Native American and she is discriminated by that. But she says that she's in limbo, in fact. So it's interesting because, and we also have lots of, literary examples of this mix of languages. And I think it's quite interesting, this provocation in literature, because so it makes us think of this translanguaging, which is the point. Okay, and so the session is open for discussion. If you want to say something.
Yes.
Good morning. Thank you for your presentation, for your talk. While you were talking about locus of initiation, I was thinking about the internet. I'm always there, and when I'm on Twitter, for example, people are there discussing many issues, and you don't know who they are. As you were saying, like when I'm here, I'm a professor, I'm there, I might be a son, and we have these different discourses in ourselves. I was thinking how the way internet works and some of the platforms work, how it can change, it's a question, how it can change the way we are communicating, and then how through this we can identify, interrogate, and interrupt. I don't know if it makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, the internet or virtual, let's call it, I don't like the term, let's call it virtual communication, which is that's not face-to-face communication. It makes a huge difference to people who, in a face-to-face situation, wouldn't say or do what they do on the internet. So yes, the importance of locus of enunciation is to say that we are always situated somewhere. We are never in no place. This is why I would question, is it possible to be in limbo? No, it's not. You can feel like you're in limbo because you are constantly being forced into different situations, but we are never in limbo. We're always located somewhere. We're always speaking from somewhere. Now that somewhere may not be the same. Right? So, for example, we have constant conflict between terms like, is locus of enunciation the same as lugar de fala? Because lugar de fala, as being used in Brazil, is a place which is fixed. Right? So you can hear people saying, eu tenho lugar de fala, você não. From locus of enunciation, we all have a locus of enunciation. The locus of enunciation says that the discourses, the knowledges that constitute us are constantly changing, but we are always in our bodies located somewhere. So we are always the effects of the knowledges and the discourses that constitute us, but the effects that come to the top, which come to the fore, which are apparent, will always be dependent on where we are. So, for example, certain platforms may I'm generalizing here, certain platforms of the internet may be spaces where you can be more violent and aggressive. Other platforms may not be. You are the same person. Right? When you are in one platform, that locus of enunciation allows you to do certain things, whereas in another platform, your locus of enunciation will not. You are still in your locus of enunciation, but that will not give you the same affordances, the same possibilities. And this is why, when we are, as teachers, we attack the internet as if it's all the same. No, we have to learn what are the affordances, how the different platforms permit certain things and not permit others. So certain platforms have certain enabling possibilities, others don't. Right? They all have enabling possibilities, but they're not the same. And this will allow us to acquire different identities. But we're not being false, we're being the same. Because we have the same history, but we may be using different discourses which are permitted to that platform. Because it's an identity, identity is always schizophrenic in the sense that we have several identities, but we are not pathologically schizophrenic because we know how to use each identity in a particular context. Yes.
This is wow. This is amazing. Okay. So now that you mentioned the internet, I'd like to ask, like, you've made your point on locus of enunciation, like the context we've been through in our lives. But with the internet, not only we are exposed to like Brazilian culture, we as Brazilian, we're exposed to Brazilian culture, but throughout our lives we've been exposed to cultures from all over the world. So I've watched like Spanish movies, Spanish TV shows, Japanese anime. We all, pretty much all of us know a little bit of anime by now. And how do you think that the internet and the way we're able to be exposed to so much culture from all over the world, how would that impact different locus of enunciations? Because I could have watched like the same movies and the same TV shows that someone from any part of the world could have watched, and we would have lots of discourses in common.
Okay, but certainly, yeah. But I'd just like to draw your attention to a certain important detail about locus of enunciation. About internet, you can ask Jana, who will be speaking next. I'm not the expert on internet, but locus of enunciation is my area of research. So what I'll tell you is this: you may listen, you may talk to people or watch films or animes or whatever from different cultures, but you are always understanding what you see from your locus of enunciation. Okay? So, for example, turn on Netflix. My wife and my daughter love Korean series on Netflix, right? But they don't understand them in the same way that a Korean would.
Yeah.
They are understanding them from their history of Brazilian novellas, right? Novelas mexicanas, they have a different locus of enunciation when they watch Korean serials or whatever. Right? So wherever you're from, if you're located in Brazil, you already have a history, you have a language, you have discourses which will influence how you understand the people from anywhere in the world, and internet makes possible for you to be in contact. So you don't become them. You don't read these texts or whatever as they do. So that will be your identity, your accent in the reading of whatever. Now, I'd just like to remind you as well that there is a lot of this fascination with globalization, with internet, with streaming, right? We have access to all of these different things. And this is globalization. Just stop for a minute and remember, globalization begins with colonization. Colonization ended politically, it did not end economically. Right? The global north, the rich nations that colonized the rest of us in the world, continue to do this financially and economically. This is what we call globalization. So what does this mean? All of those ideologies, those politics of colonization continue in globalization. Again, we are made to think that everything is universal. You can now buy hamburgers from a certain American brand on your corner, your bike, right? So you feel like you're American anywhere in the US. No, you don't. You are being forced to buy. You are being convinced by a certain scheme of propaganda, which has capitalism behind it. When I say capitalism, I mean it's profit-oriented, right? So don't think that you can feel American here in Brazil without even going to the United States. No, this is not about being American or not. It's about profit. Just remember that. But we are still the consumers. So we are, and again, as we are here in the university, it's important to remember, for the global north, and this is how colonization continues in globalization. For globalization, it's important for all of us outside the global north to be consumers of everything produced in the global north. Maybe clothing, it may be sneakers, it may be hamburgers, right? It may be fried chicken. We are consumers, and they want us all to be consumers all over the world, and faithful consumers. But when it comes to producing knowledge, if we don't speak English, we don't produce knowledge.